Hey there, it's Laurie. I'm so happy you stopped by. Today, I'm sharing 5 of my favorite winter and Christmas wreaths. As always, I used mostly Dollar Tree supplies, but I added in a few things that I already had on hand. I hope you have fun hanging out and crafting with me, so let's get busy. To start my wreath, I'm using one of the wire candy cane forms from the Dollar Tree. To wrap it, I'm using 2 of the red and white clotheslines, and I found these at the Dollar Tree as well. In a past video, I used the same clothesline to make a little tree, and I'll link that video below in case you'd like to check it out. Before I unwound the clothesline, it does come with a little hanger, so I just used my clippers and clipped it off. I'm taking one end of the clothesline, I'm wrapping it over and under the end of the candy cane. Now that I have my measurement, I'm adding some hot glue to the end top of the candy cane and attaching the clothesline. I'm now turning it over, adding on some hot glue and attaching the other piece underneath. I made sure that I had enough clothesline when I attached it, so I have a little tail and I'm just snipping that off. To make the clothesline easier to work with because the length is just too long, I pulled out, roughly 2 to 3 feet and snipped it off. From this point on, it's all about weaving your clothesline up and over and under and up and over around the supports of the candy cane. When you come to the other side, you're going to go up around the outside of the candy cane, and then once again, weave it through the candy cane supports, up and over until you come to the other side. To make it easier and quicker to pull through all the supports, I did first roll the clothesline in a small ball. That didn't work. I then figure eighted it in my hand and tried to push it through like that, and that didn't work either. So I ended up just pulling it through singularly, and it's a lot of work and a little monotonous, but it seemed to be the quickest and easiest way to weave it through the form. When I come to the end to attach the clothesline, I'm just once again using my hot glue gun. I added some onto the back and then just pressed down the end of the clothesline. To add on my next piece, I weaved it through the form, and on the back I added some hot glue and attached it to the other clothesline. From there, I'm just continuing to weave the clothesline through as I'm working my way up the candy cane, and every so often I do just push it down so that I keep it tightly together. One thing I did notice as I was weaving the clothesline through is the end started to fray on me. So what I ended up doing was just tying a knot in both ends. And by doing this, they kept their integrity as I pushed them through the form. When I came to the end of the clothesline, I hot glued that down on the back onto the other clothesline, and then I started my new one, and once again I weaved that through, hot glued that end down, and then just continued on from there. I did make sure as I was adding the several cut pieces that I knotted both ends so that they wouldn't fray. Apparently, as I was adding the clothesline to my wreath, I was being watched by my cat Emmeline. All of a sudden, she appeared on the table, investigating what I was doing, and she wanted to play. To finish off the end of my candy cane wreath, I'm measuring and cutting a piece long enough to wrap around it. I'm then placing some hot glue over the end, attaching the clothesline, and then wrapping the ends underneath. I'm then attaching both of those in place with my glue gun. I also did make sure to use my finger protector so that I didn't get burned. On the wreath, some of the supports are showing through, so what I'm going to do is cut a length of the clothesline Add on some hot glue and cover each one of them. When I have it in place, I turn the wreath over and glue down the two ends. I then moved my way up the wreath and I covered the other supports. Now that it's done, you can hang it as is, but I'm going to embellish mine for the holidays. I'm making a bow for my wreath and I picked up this pretty 2-inch wired green sparkly ribbon at the Christmas tree shop. I'm using two 1.5-inch ribbons that I picked up at the Dollar Tree, this pretty white with candy cane edge, and this pretty Christmas striped ribbon. I need something to attach the bow together, so I'm using a piece of floral wire. To make my bow, I'm using my bow maker, and I had picked this up a while ago on Amazon. I only have enough green ribbon left on the spool to make two 10-inch tails and two 5-inch loops. I'm adding on my white ribbon and I'm making two 10-inch tails, but this time I'm making four 4-inch loops. For my Christmas stripe ribbon, I'm once again making two 10-inch tails and four 4-inch loops. To attach all my ribbons together, I'm placing the floral wire in the middle of the bow and then just twisting it on tightly. Now all that's left to do is fluff out the loops. For the tails, you can always dovetail them. I'm cutting mine off at an angle. Adding it to the candy cane is super easy. I just decided where I wanted it, wrapped the wires around the front, and twisted them together on the back. To help hold it in place, I added on a dot of hot glue. I'm adding a sign onto my wreath, and I picked up this cute Happy Holidays ornament at the Dollar Tree. I removed the buffalo check bow and the hanger. I found its placement under the bow and added on some hot glue. I'm hot gluing this little pine cone that I had on hand into the center of the bow. I'm adding on two pine sprigs, and I removed these from a Dollar Tree pick. I tucked each one at an angle under my bow and then hot glued them in place. I have two Dollar Tree picks and I'm removing the green sprigs off of both of them. And you can actually find these in bags at the Dollar Tree. I just had these picks on hand, so I'm going to use these. I tucked both of them under the bow and hot glued them in place. I'm now adding on some of the Dollar Tree's frosted fern, and I just removed all the pieces from the stem. I don't have any specific placement for them. I'm just kind of evenly spacing the large ones around the bow. Once I was happy with where they were, I then used my hot glue gun to help hold them in place. For the smaller pieces, I tucked them around the pine cone, and then I added a few under the bow. I once again used my hot glue gun to attach them in place. To make the red on my candy cane pop, I'm using some of these large snow-covered berries, and I picked these up at the Dollar Tree. They come twisted in sets of 2, but I pulled some apart, and then I just randomly placed them around the bow. And just like the other embellishments, once I had them in place, to make them permanent, I used my hot glue gun. To finish up, and I'm one of those people that I just love layering on accents, but I swear this is my final accent. I'm cutting away some of this thin wispy grass off of this daisy floral. I left half of them green, and using my white acrylic paint, I painted the other half white. I tucked in the green and then the white, and once I had them all in place, I just secured them with my hot glue gun. Once I had everything attached, and all these embellishments are completely optional, I added a wire hanger to the back of my candy cane. With that in place, all that's left to do is to hang this pretty candy cane wreath on my door. If you're new to my channel, please consider clicking on that little red subscribe button below and leaving me a thumbs up. And to all my returning friends, you know I'm always so happy to see you. Getting started and making this my base, I'm using one of the 14-inch wire wreath forms from the Dollar Tree. To attach my fabric to the form, I'm using 24 of these silver chenille stems, and these came from the Dollar Tree as well. You can use any color, but silver or white would work best for this project. I'm centering 2 chenille stems on the 2 outside wires. After I have it around the 2 wires, I make sure that the 2 ends match up evenly, and then I give it 3 or 4 twists. As I'm adding them on, I'm trying to space them as evenly as possible on the section. If they're a little off, not to worry, because when you add the fabric, you won't notice. I continued working my way around, centering 2 chenille stems onto each section. Now that I'm done, because they're a little slippery and to help hold them in place, I like to give each of them a couple of dots of hot glue. To help protect my work surface, I did place a couple of sheets of the Dollar Tree waxed paper underneath the form. This way it catches those little drips of hot glue. Now that I'm done, to make it easier to attach the inside stems, I'm just folding the outside ones down flat. To add my second layer of chenille stems, I'm adding one around the 2 inside wire support, once again matching up the 2 ends and then giving them 2 to 3 twists. The next chenille stem I'll be centering in between the 2 outer and matching up the 2 ends and then giving those 2 to 3 twists as well. I'm following this pattern as I'm working my way around the inside wires. When I'm done, I'll have all 24 chenille stems in place and ready to hold the fabric. Now that I'm done, once again, I'm going to use my hot glue and add a couple of dots to each chenille stem to help hold them in place. Now that I'm done, and it does look a bit like a crazy mess, I am going to fold the inside stems to the center and then stand the outside ones up straight. To add the fabric on my wreath, I'm using 3 of the white table runners from the Dollar Tree. The fabric is textured and both ends have a point. To attach the fabric, I'm gathering one of the pointed ends about 3 inches or so, and I'm tucking it under one of the outside wire supports. I'm then placing it between the 2 chenille stems and attaching it in place. I'm now tucking the 2 sides of the fabric under each other and measuring out 5 inches. I gather it together, making a little poof, and then attach it to the next set of chenille stems. Once I have it in place, I'm then kind of puffing up the fabric. From there, I continue following the same instructions, making sure that the two sides of the fabric are tucked under, measuring out 5 inches of fabric and attaching it in place. And then I give it a little fluffing after I'm done. As I'm working my way around the form, I'm always making sure that the two sides of the fabric are tucked under. I've made some other Dollar Tree table runner wreaths, and I'll have those linked below in my description in case you'd like to check them out. When I come to the end of my fabric, I then tuck the little extra end under the form. Now to attach the next runner, I'm once again gathering about 3 inches of the pointed fabric. I attach it to the last set of chenille stems where I made a poof and then tuck the end under the middle support. When I complete the circle, I attach my last poof to the first set of chenille stems. I now have the outside of the wreath complete and I'm moving on into the center. I once again measure out 5 inches of fabric and now attach it to the next set of chenille stems in the center. And now I'm continuing to measure out my 5 inches of fabric, making sure that the two sides of the fabric are always on the bottom, and then just working my way around the inside of the form. I made the poofs for my wreath at 5 inches, but if you want your wreath to be a little bit wider, you can always make them 6 or even 7 inches. When I come to the end of this fabric, I just follow the same instructions as adding on the last runner. Tucking under the end, attaching it to the chenille stem, and working your way around until the wreath is complete. When I was done, I then cut off the extra fabric and tucked the tail end under between the two wire supports. Now that I'm done, and to hide the chenille stems, I'm folding them over and twisting them together on the bottom. And once I had them twisted, I then folded them over flat. After I had all the chenille stems tucked under, I then went around and just kind of fluffed up my fabric poofs. I'm making 8 ruffles for my wreath, and I'm using 2 rolls of mesh from the Dollar Tree, one white and this one pretty grayish blue. I'm making my mesh strips 12 inches, and to make them easier to cut, I cut out a 12-inch piece of cardstock. I'm starting with my bluish gray mesh, and I'm wrapping it around the cardstock to get my 8 pieces. When I'm done, I then use my scissors to cut both ends. I'm making 2 white ruffles per bunch, so I'm cutting 16 pieces of white mesh. With my mesh cut, and to attach the ruffles together, I'm using 4 of the silver chenille stems, and I'm cutting them in half. Along with the cut chenille stems, you'll need 3 clips, and I'm just using these. They came from the Dollar Tree. Making the ruffles is super easy. I'm first using my scissors to hold down one end of the mesh. I'm then rolling 3 small curls and attaching them in the center with my clip. I'm now working on the other end, and I'm rolling 4 small curls, and then I'm just kind of walking it up to meet the other curls and the clip and clipping them both together. I'm now following the same instructions and making my second white ruffle. When I rolled the ends of my mesh, sometimes I rolled 3 and sometimes I rolled 4. And when we put the ruffles all together, it really won't make a difference. With my 2 white ruffles complete, I'm then using the bluish gray, and once again, I'm just following the same instructions. Now that they're all complete, I'm going to attach them together. I'm first adding a white ruffle to my hand, then the bluish gray, and then another white ruffle. I'm taking the half piece of chenille stem, wrapping it around the center, and then pulling it together and twisting it tightly. With that bunch complete, I went ahead and made 7 more. To attach my ruffles, I'm placing 2 of the chenille stems around the 2 center wires on the form. I'm then turning the wreath over and twisting them together tightly. I'm now adding my second ruffle bunch directly across from my first. I'm now adding the third halfway between my first and second. And now I'm adding my fourth directly across from my third. With those in place, I'm now adding on my next 4 bunches. I'm centering each one between the 4 ruffles that I've already placed on the wreath. And as I add them, I'm making sure that once again, they're directly across from each other. I'm adding 3 2.5-inch ribbons to my wreath. I'm using this pretty silver openwork ribbon from the Dollar Tree, a sheer with silver ribbon, and a blue and white snowflake, and these 2 I had on hand. All my ribbons will be 10 inches, and to make them easier to cut, I just cut a 10-inch piece out of cardstock. Then, like I did with the mesh, I just wrapped the ribbon around and cut both ends. I'm adding 8 ribbon bunches, so I'm cutting 8 out of each color. When that ribbon was complete, I then followed up with my other 2. Now that they're cut, I'm going to dovetail the ends, which is super easy. All you do is fold the ribbon in half and then cut away both ends at an angle. I followed the exact same instructions for all 24 of my ribbons. Now that I have them all cut, I'm going to attach them together, and once again, I just cut 4 of the chenille stems in half. I'm making my first 4 ribbon bunches by placing the blue and white snowflake on the bottom, the silver in the center, and then the sheer white ribbon. I'm matching up the ends, folding the ribbon in half to find my center. I give it a little bit of a pinch, and then using one of the chenille stems, I place it over the center and then twist it tightly. I'm making 3 more bunches just like this, and for my next 4, I'm placing the white sheer on the bottom, the silver in the center, and the blue and white snowflakes on the top. I'm once again making sure the ends are even, folding them in half to find the center and giving them a little pinch, and then attaching them together with the half chenille stem. Now that they're all complete, it's time to add them to the wreath. I'm starting with my blue and white snowflake ribbon on top, and I'm placing it between the 2 mesh ruffles. I'm wrapping the chenille stems around the 2 center wires and then twisting them together tightly. I'm now moving directly across and adding my matching ribbons. I'm centering my third bunch between two mesh curls and between my first two ribbon bunches. And then I'm attaching my last directly across from the third. I'm adding my last 4 ribbon bunches by evenly spacing them around the wreath. And once again, I'm making sure that one ribbon cluster is directly across from the other. Now that all my ribbons are in place, I'm just moving around the wreath and fluffing them up. For the snowflake accents on my wreath, I'm using 4 of the white and 4 of the blue and silver sparkly snowflakes, and I picked these up at the Dollar Tree. When you remove the hanger, you'll see there's a little extra end where it was attached. I just used my scissors and clipped it off. I ended up doing this for all 8 of my snowflakes. I'm first adding my snowflakes to the wreath to find their placement. I'm adding the blue and silver snowflake onto the white sheer ribbon, and I'm adding the white snowflake onto the blue and white snowflake ribbon. I always like to do this before I permanently attach them, just in case they're not exactly where I want them. It's easier to move them around. After all 8 are in place, I then used my glue gun to attach them. I'm making sure to use plenty of hot glue so that they don't move once they're hanging up. If you wanted to make this a Christmas wreath, all you need to do is add some poinsettias in place of the blue snowflakes. Add on some green and red mesh and some Christmas ribbons. And I think I might make one of those after I'm done. I wanted to break up a bit of the blue and white, so I'm using 2 bunches of this frosted greenery, and I did pick this up at the Dollar Tree. There are some longer stems and some shorter ones, so while I was removing them, I did keep them separate because I'm going to add the longer ones first. I have 8 longer pieces of the greenery, and I'm going to be adding one of these in between each of the mesh ruffles. I continued working my way around the wreath, adding on each piece of greenery. Now that I have them all in place, I'm using my hot glue gun to attach them. Now that I'm done, I'm placing on the shorter pieces, and I'm placing one behind each of the snowflakes. I think the wreath looks really pretty with just the blue and the white, but I wanted to kind of break it up a bit, so that's why I'm adding in the greenery, but this step is completely optional. And just like the larger pieces, once I had them all in place, I used my hot glue gun to attach them. After adding on all the greenery, I had about 4 pieces left over, so I just randomly added those here and there. To add the Let It Snow in the center of my wreath, I found this cute sign at the Dollar Tree. The lettering is raised, so I used my knife and very gently removed it from the sign. I centered it on the middle of the wreath, and then using my glue gun, I attached it in place. Now that I'm done, this pretty Let It Snow snowflake wreath is ready to hang. Getting started, I'm using one of the children's totes from the Dollar Tree, and I'm removing the flower and the handles. I'm painting mine white, and I'm using some of my white acrylic paint, but if you have some spray paint, that would work great too. Now that it's dry, on one side, I'm using my scissors and I'm cutting in the center about 3/4 of the way up. To make the bottom skirt base, I'm using one of the round red Dollar Tree placemats. I removed the tag, folded it in half, and then secured it together with some hot glue. I then added some hot glue to one side and then folded it in half so that it kind of looks like a slice of watermelon. I'm attaching the two together by placing the pointed end into the elf's shirt. And then I hot glued them together. I pulled the other side tightly against the skirt, overlapped it, and then attached it onto the other side. I then turned it over, added some hot glue to the top of the skirt, and attached the two pieces together. I'm making a tutu for my elf, and I'm using some of the red, white, and green tulle from the Dollar Tree, and my green tulle actually has a texture to it, but that's completely optional. I'm cutting all three colors at 14 inches, 7 in red, 7 in white, and 8 in green. I'm attaching the tulle onto a red Dollar Tree chenille stem, but you can use any color at all. I have all my tulle cut, and I'm starting with red, but you can start with any color, it doesn't matter. I'm folding it in half and making sure that the two ends match up. You now have a little hole on the top, and I'm placing my tulle behind the chenille stem and slipping the two ends through the loop and pulling it tightly against the chenille stem. I'm now adding on the white tulle, and I'm following the exact same instructions. And to finish up, I then added on my green tulle, folding it in half and matching up the ends, and then placing the loop behind the chenille stem and tucking the two ends through it. I continued on following the same pattern of the red, white, and green until the tutu was complete. The reason I cut 8 pieces of green tulle instead of the 7 was so that I could have one on each end of the tutu. Now that I'm done, I'm attaching it above the skirt. I'm finding its placement and then wrapping the two chenille stems around the sides. I'm turning it over, and using my hot glue gun, I'm attaching the chenille stems to the back, which actually is the front of the elf. I then turned it over, lifted the tulle, and added some hot glue to attach it to the front, which is actually the back of the elf. I'm making some hair for my elf, and I'm using one of the white hand towels from the Dollar Tree. Once I remove the hanger tags, I'm folding it in half from top to bottom. And now, using my scissors, I'm cutting it along the fold. I now have 2 pieces, but I'm only going to be working with one. I'm folding this piece in half, side to side, and then cutting on the fold. Now that I have 2 pieces, each side has a finished edge, so I'm cutting those off as well. While you're cutting the towel, don't worry if your lines aren't perfect because once we make the hair, you'll never even notice. Now with my 2 pieces, I'm going to fold them lengthwise into 3 even pieces. And then using my scissors, I'm going to cut on the fold so I have 3 independent pieces of towel. Here are my 3 strips of towel, and you can see they are definitely not perfect. I folded my second towel in thirds, cut along the folds, and now I have 6 individual pieces. To dye my elf's hair, I'm using some of this Dollar Tree instant coffee and about 1.5 cups of hot water. I added in 2 tablespoons and mixed it all together. I'm now adding in all 6 strips of fabric, and then I'm just using my spoon to make sure that they're evenly coated. I then let the fabric set in the coffee water for about an hour. After an hour, I wrung out each piece, placed them on a foil-lined cookie sheet, and baked them in my oven at 250 degrees for 30 minutes. They're now this pretty golden color, and I'm going to use 2 rubber bands to attach them together. I'm making 2 braids, so I gathered up 3 ends of the fabric together and then secured them with a rubber band. With all 3 pieces secured together, I placed my heavy clippers on the end with the rubber band, and then I braided the 3 pieces of fabric. When I was done braiding, I then grabbed each end and gave it a little pull. Then attached that end with another rubber band. I then followed the same instructions for my second braid. When I was done, I then used my scissors and I cut off both ends so they were even and straight. I placed the 2 braids onto the back of my elf and then hot glued them into place. For her hat, I'm using one of these elf hats, and I picked this up at the Dollar Tree. I'm giving my hat a bit of fullness, so I'm adding in a handful of polyfill. The green accent on this hat is a little too large, so I'm going to fold it under about 1 inch and then attach it in place with my glue gun. I worked my way around, adding on the hot glue and folding the edges under. When I was done, I then glued the little bell accents in place. To add the hat onto my elf, I'm simply sliding it over the top. And then I added on some hot glue to help hold it in place. When I was done, I turned my elf over and I glued down the 2 sides. And you'll see that in the center there is a little bit of extra material. I just kind of folded that over and glued that in place. With my hat in place, I'm folding over the top point with the bell and attaching that as well. I'm making 2 bows for my elf's braids, and I'm using some of this pretty striped Christmas ribbon from the Dollar Tree. I'm making 3 simple bows, 2 for the braids and 1 I'll be adding later on to the hat. I cut the tails off at an angle, and then using my glue gun, I attached 1 to each braid. For her legs, I'm using these 2 elf picks that I picked up at Michael's. They were $4 each. I used a coupon, so they ended up costing me a little over $5. To add them, I placed them both between the placemat skirt and then hot glued them into place. I'm adding an accent to her hat, and I'm using 1 14-inch piece of the white tulle, and all I'm doing is making it into a simple bow. When I'm done, I'm adding on that third bow that matches the braids, and I'm simply hot gluing it to the center of the tool bow. And now all that's left to do is attach it just above the bell. I used a piece of floral wire and added a hanger onto the back, and now this Christmas elf is ready to hang. Getting started, I'm using 4 of the 2 packs of white lace doilies, and I found these at the Dollar Tree in the kitchen department. I removed them from the packaging, and I have a total of 8, and you'll see that each one comes with a little manufacturer tag. You'll want to remove them, and I just used my seam ripper to take them off. To make my doily flowers as my backdrop, I'm using 8 pieces of floral wire, and these measure 12 inches in length. To get started, I'm first folding my doily in half, then I'm folding it in half again, and then in half a third time. When I'm done, you'll see that I have a little pointed end. To attach the folds together, I'm feeding one end of my floral wire through the bottom about a half an inch from the end. When that's complete, I then push the other end of the wire up through the fabric. I then make sure that both ends of the wires match up, and I twist them around the fabric about 5 times. When I'm done, you'll see that the center is gathered together and it kind of looks like a little flower. It's super floppy, so to stiffen them up, I'm using my Mod Podge and giving the front and the back a complete coat. I place mine down on a piece of waxed paper, and I just use the Dollar Tree brand. I then use a wet foam brush and apply a generous amount of the Mod Podge on the front of my doily. When you're done, it's definitely going to be wet, and if you have any other type of fabric stiffener, you can always use that instead. Once I'm done, I then turn it over and do the same on the back. I did this for all 8 of my doilies, letting them set up overnight so they were completely dry. It's now the next day and the fabric is dry and stiff. I'm going to be adding this onto a 14-inch wire wreath form, and I picked this up at the Dollar Tree. To attach my doily flower, I'm starting by placing one wire around the inside, and then I'm placing the second wire around the support and on the third wire. I'm then bringing both ends of the wire together and twisting them together tightly. If you want a larger wreath, attach your wires, one on the outside and the other on the second inside wire. And then once again, just twist the 2 ends together tightly. When I was done, I folded my wires down, but you can always clip them off. To attach the next doily, I'm following the exact same instructions and attaching it directly across from the first. I'm now placing my third doily in between my first 2. Once again, I'm placing the end of the floral wire around the inside of the frame wire. And the second end of the floral wire, I'm placing around the third wire on the frame and then twisting both ends together tightly. When I'm done, I'm then adding on the 4th doily directly across from the 3rd. With my doilies in place, to make sure that they don't move, I'm using my hot glue gun and adding some hot glue to the 4 wires on the back. I'm now attaching my next 4, and I'm placing them around the same wires, the inside and the 3rd wire on the wreath form. I'm feeding the two ends of the floral wire through the doily fabric and then attaching them together on the back like I did the other four. I'm now attaching my sixth doily directly across from my fifth. Again, I'm feeding the floral wire through the fabric and wrapping the ends around the wire form. I'm adding my seventh by placing it between the top two doilies. And finishing up with my eighth by attaching it directly across from the seventh. To make sure the top four don't move out of place, I'm once again using my hot glue gun and just adding some hot glue onto the wires. With that complete, I now have the base for my Christmas wreath. I'm adding on a mesh curl accent and I'm using some red, white, and green mesh from the Dollar Tree. I'm using 4 pieces of floral wire to attach my curls together. I'm folding them in half and cutting them so that I have 8. I'm cutting my mesh into 8-inch pieces, and to make them easier to cut, I cut out an 8-inch piece of cardstock. I wrapped my red mesh around the cardstock to get my 8 pieces and then cut it off at both ends. I then followed up with the white mesh and the green mesh. So when I was done, I had 8 pieces of each in the 3 colors. With my mesh cut, I'm going to roll them into curls. To make my mesh curls, I'm first starting with the red and I'm rolling it into a loose curl. When I'm done, I'm just tucking it between my 2 fingers, but if you're more comfortable, you can always use a clip. I'm now rolling my white mesh the same way. When I'm done, I tuck it next to the red and I'm finishing up making my green curl. To attach all 3 together, I'm placing the half piece of floral wire over the top. I'm pulling it down tightly and then twisting the 2 pieces together underneath. I made 3 more with the red on the top, and now I'm making 4 more with the green on the top. Once again, rolling my green mesh, my white mesh, and the red mesh, placing the half piece of floral wire over the top, pulling it down tight, and then twisting the 2 ends underneath. Now that I'm done, I have 4 curl bunches with the red on the top and 4 curl bunches with the green on the top. I'm using the Dollar Tree mesh and it does have a tendency to fray. Sorry, Dollar Tree, but it does. I like to use hairspray and give them all a really good coat. It doesn't magically stop them from fraying, but it definitely helps them out. I let them dry for a few minutes and now I'm adding them onto the base. I'm starting with the green curl on the top and pushing the 2 ends of the floral wire through the fabric. I'm then twisting the floral wire together around the 2 outer wires. I'm adding on my next mesh curl, once again the green on the top and directly across from the first. When I'm done twisting the wires, I just fold down the excess end. And now I'm moving on to adding my third, and I'm centering it between the first 2. With those 3 in place, I'm adding on my 4th directly across from the 3rd. With that complete, I'm now attaching my last 4 curl bunches. These bunches have the red curls on the top, and I'm placing one between each of the bunches that are already in place. I chose these colors because it's a Christmas wreath and they complement the colors of the sign that I'll be placing in the center. But you can always change up the colors and what you place in the middle of your wreath, and this design will work throughout the year. With those in place, I'm now adding on my ribbon accent. I'm using this 2.5-inch wired Merry Christmas ribbon, along with this 2.5-inch wired red with white snowflake ribbon, and this 1.5-inch wired pretty Christmas striped ribbon, and all three came from the Dollar Tree. My fourth ribbon is 1.5-inch wired Santa Claus ribbon, and I picked this up at Michael's. I'm cutting my ribbons at 10 inches, so I cut a 10-inch piece of cardboard. And just like the mesh, I wrapped my ribbons around the cardboard to get my 8 pieces and then cut them off at both ends. These are the ribbons that I chose for my project, but once again changed them up to match your home decor. With all my ribbons cut, I'm going to dovetail the ends, and this is super easy. I just fold my ribbon in half and cut away at an angle on both ends. I worked my way through the ribbons, dovetailing all 32 of them. I'm using 2 different size ribbons for this project. Honestly, it's because I had them on hand, so if you prefer to use the same size ribbons, that will work great too. With all of them dovetailed, I'm once again cutting 4 pieces of floral wire in half. And I'll be using this to attach the ribbons together. I'm making 4 ribbon bunches of the Merry Christmas ribbon, the Christmas stripe, the snowflake, and the Santa ribbon. I'm making sure the ends line up, folding the ribbons in half to find my center. I give them a little pinch and then place the floral wire over the center of them and twist it together tightly. When I'm done, I give them a little fluffing. I'm making 4 sets of ribbons with the Santa Claus on the top, and for my next set, I'm using the red and white snowflake, the Santa Claus ribbon, the Merry Christmas, and the Christmas striped ribbon. I make sure the ends line up, fold it in half to find my center, give it a little pinch, and attach it together with a piece of floral wire. Now that I'm done, I'm going to make 3 more that match this set. I'm attaching the ribbons to the wreath form, and I'm starting with the 4 ribbons with Santa on the top. I'm attaching my first one between the 2 mesh curls on the wreath, and I'm simply sliding the wires down through the fabric and wrapping my 2 wires around the 2 outer wires on the form. I'm now adding my next one directly across from my first. I'm adding my 3rd ribbon bunch between 2 of the mesh curls and evenly spacing it between the 2 other ribbons. And now my 4th ribbon bunch directly across from the 3rd. I'm now adding my 2nd set of ribbons, and I'm placing my first between 2 of the mesh curls. And now I'm placing my 2nd across from my first, and I'm just following the exact same instructions as I did adding my first group of ribbons. I'm now adding on my 3rd, and when I'm done, I'll add my 4th directly across from it. The reason I add mine on this way is it helps me keep everything evenly spaced around the wreath. Now that I have them all added, I'm going to work my way around the wreath and fluff out the ribbons. I continued fluffing them until they filled out the open space in the wreath. I'm adding a sign to the center of my wreath, and I picked up this really cute "Believe in the Magic of Christmas" sign at the Dollar Tree. I removed the hanger and then pushed aside the curls and the ribbons to find its placement in the center of my wreath. Happy with its placement, I'm now adding some hot glue to the fabric underneath and pressing the sign down to hold it permanently in place. As I'm adding the glue, I make sure to push the curls and the ribbons out of the way so they don't get stuck underneath. As an accent on my wreath, I'm using 8 poinsettias, 4 white and 4 red, and I picked these up at the Dollar Tree. I removed 4 flower heads from each stem. Before I permanently attach them, I'm going to place the white poinsettias in the center of the Santa ribbon and the red poinsettias in the center of the Christmas stripe ribbon. I'm happy with their placement and they're all sitting nicely inside the ribbon. So now I'm using my glue gun and attaching each one permanently in place. I chose to mix up the colors and use the red and the white poinsettias for my wreath, but you can always use just white or just red. For my final accent, I'm adding on 8 red and green candy canes, and I picked these up at the Dollar Tree. And now, just like the flowers, I'm going to find their placement first. I'm tucking the straight edge under the ribbons, and I'm resting the hook on the mesh. I'm having all the candy canes face in the same direction to give my wreath some visual interest. Now that I'm done, I'm going to use my glue gun and permanently attach them by gluing the tops and the bottoms in place. I'm one of those people that continues to add things onto my wreath, so adding on these candy canes is completely optional. With all the candy canes attached in place, I went around one last time and I fluffed out all my ribbons. I kept with the same color scheme of the red, white, and green, and I really love the way this came out. It definitely says, hey, it's Christmas time, and I can't wait to hang this in my home. Getting started, I'm using 3 sets of the 4 wooden snowflakes, and I found these at the Dollar Tree. Each set is attached by a little string, so I cut them free from each other, and now I have 12 separate snowflakes. Before I glue them together, I want to find their placement, so I'm lining them up and I'm overlapping the ends to form an oval. I'm attaching my snowflakes together using my Starbond thick glue, and this is my go-to glue for all my unfinished wood projects. These snowflakes won't come apart once I use it, and it sets up super quick. If you'd like to give it a try, I do have the company linked below in my description. I added the glue to the ends of my snowflakes and attached them together. I made sure to use a generous amount and overlap the ends of the snowflake as I attach them to get that oval shape. I kept adding on the glue, working my way around until all my snowflakes were attached. I'm using my white acrylic paint and I'm giving my wreath a top coat. This took me some time to paint because there are so many of those little nooks and crannies in all of the individual snowflakes. So if you don't want to hand paint it and you do have some white spray paint on hand, that would work out great too. Now that it's dry, I'm going to give it a bit of a sparkle using some of these larger crystal jewels. I picked these up at Michael's and I've used them in some of my other projects. I'm using E6000 to make sure that they're permanently attached, and I just added some to the center of each snowflake and then added on my crystal jewel. You probably can add hot glue to attach them, but I just wanted to make sure that they wouldn't fall off. While those are setting up, I'm going to paint this wooden Let It Snow sign that I picked up at the Dollar Tree. I'm using some pretty blue acrylic paint, and I'm painting all the letters and excluding the snowflake. With the blue complete, and even though you're not really going to see it, I did paint the snowflake white. With my sign dry, I'm going to distress it just a bit, and I'm using a light grit sandpaper. I'm using my sandpaper and I'm sanding around the outside and the inside of all the letters. I chose to do this for my wreath, but this step is completely optional. I'm using some of the small crystal jewels and I'm attaching them onto the Let It Snow sign as an accent. I'm giving my sign a coat of Mod Podge and I'm also going to use this as the glue. After I added on the Mod Podge, I then attached the crystals. I placed them at the top and the bottom of the letters and then just kind of randomly here and there. While I was adding the jewels, I did make sure to add one over the hole where the original hanger was. I continued working my way around the sign, adding the Mod Podge until all my letters had their sparkle. I'm now adding my sign and my snowflakes together. I centered the Let It Snow sign in the middle of my wreath. Now using my glue gun, I'm attaching it into place. You can use E6000 to attach it, but I found that the glue gun worked just as well. To cover up the snowflake on the sign, I'm using one of these pretty white snowflake ornaments, and I picked this up at the Dollar Tree. I removed the hanger and then I used my scissors to cut a little point so it would match the other end and remove the hanger hole. I then added some hot glue to the snowflake on the sign and attached the ornament. I'm making 2 bows for my wreath and I'm using 2 2.5-inch snowflake ribbons, and I had picked these up at Michael's. To attach them together, I'm cutting in half a 12-inch piece of floral wire. I'm using my bow maker and I found this on Amazon. I matched the 2 ends of my ribbons up. I'm giving myself a 5-inch tail and 2 4-inch loops and then another 5-inch tail. To attach my bow together, I'm placing my half piece of floral wire over the center and then twisting it on the back tightly. To give the ends a more finished look, I'm going to dovetail them, which is super easy. I just folded the 2 ribbons in half and cut away the end at an angle. With that complete, I cut about a 3-inch piece of the outside ribbon, then folded the 2 sides into the center. I then added some hot glue to the center of my bow and wrapped the small piece of ribbon around it. I then turned it over and glued down the 2 end pieces. When I finished this bow, I then made another. Adding them to the wreath, I placed down my first bow and twisted the wires around the snowflake. I then added my second bow facing my first and followed the exact same instructions. To finish up, I added some hot glue under each of the bows. I fluffed out my ribbons and now my Let It Snow wreath is ready to hang. Here we are at the end of the video, and I wanted to say once again, thank you so much for stopping by. I hope you had fun crafting with me, and I do have a playlist full of holiday and seasonal wreaths, and I'll link that at the end of this video as well as in my description. If you're new here and you had a good time, please be sure to hit that little red subscribe button below and tap on the notification bell so you can be notified every time I upload a new video. Have a great day, stay safe and healthy, and I will see you soon. Bye everybody!